The ship had no name that anyone could agree on. Different species called it different things. The Thari called it the Mouth. The Drasan called it the Empty God. The Sorn Collective had a word for it in their shared language that translated roughly to the thing that should not be looked at directly. Most species with any real knowledge of galactic history knew exactly what it was, where it was, and why nobody went near it. The ones who didn't know found out fast, usually from an elder who sat them down with a serious face, and explained things in the tone people use when they are not exaggerating. It floated at the edge of the Rylan cluster, a region of dead stars and cold rock near the outer boundary of the mapped galaxy. The cluster itself was not particularly dangerous. Ships passed through it on trade routes without much trouble. The rocks were easy to navigate around, and the dead stars gave off nothing worth worrying about. The whole region was quiet and dark and completely unremarkable in every way except for the ship. It had been there for over 400 years. Nobody knew who had built it. Nobody knew how old it was before anyone found it. Nobody knew what it was for, where it had come from, or what it was waiting for. What everyone did know was short and simple and had been in every galactic safety briefing for 300 years. Every species that had tried to board it had died. All of them. Without exception. The Dreesen had been first. 391 years ago, a team of 12 of their finest engineers had gone out in a sealed boarding craft to study the ship. The Dreesen were not reckless people. They were careful, patient, and methodical. They had mapped 17 star systems without a single crew loss. They went slowly with full sensor sweeps with every safety measure in place. Their boarding craft reached the hull of the ship and touched its surface. One transmission came back, a long rising tone. No words, just that single sound climbing higher and higher for 4 seconds, then silence. The craft was never found. The engineers were never found. The only evidence that they had been there at all was a scorch mark on the hull of the big ship, faint and about 1 meter across, shaped vaguely like a hand reaching out. 40 years later, the Keth tried. The Keth were not engineers and they were not patient. They were warriors, tall and formed with clay-gray skin and eyes set too wide on their faces for most other species to look at comfortably. They had conquered 11 systems in a century and had a simple approach to things they wanted. Take them. They sent 400 soldiers and 5 heavy assault craft with equipment large enough to cut open the hull of a small moon. And they broadcast the whole operation live so that every species in the sector could watch them take the unclaimed ship. The Kathari Grand Commander made a speech before the fleet departed. It was recorded and filed and later studied by historians for what it revealed about Kathari overconfidence. Every species in the sector watched the broadcast. When the 5 assault craft reached 500 m from the hull, they all stopped working. Not explosions, not a beam weapon or a missile strike. They simply stopped. Life support engines, backup systems, emergency manual overrides, all of it went dark and silent in under 3 seconds. The 5 craft drifted there for 2 days before a recovery team got close enough to attach cables and pull them back. Inside they found 400 soldiers, all dead, all sitting in their seats with their hands resting in their laps. No burns, no wounds, no sign of anything that should have killed them. But every single one of the 400 had the same expression on their face. The Kathari did not frighten easily. They had built an entire culture around pain tolerance and the suppression of fear. But every one of those soldiers looked afraid. Not surprised, not confused, deeply, completely, utterly afraid. The xenobiologists and researchers who studied the footage argued about interpretations for decades. But there was no real disagreement about what they were seeing. Something had frightened 400 trained Kiri warriors to death without laying a hand on them. The galaxy noted this, updated its star charts, put a warning symbol next to the ship's coordinates, and mostly agreed by unspoken consent to stop discussing it in public settings. The ship acquired the informal name The Condemned, which appeared first in a small courier company's internal route warnings and then spread across navigation databases the way these things always did. Not officially, not by anyone's decision, just quietly and thoroughly until no one could remember calling it anything else. Do not approach. Highly dangerous. 'Cause unknown. Over the following 3 centuries, 9 more attempts were made. Not all by warriors, the Valhari were diplomats by nature. They believed genuinely and without cynicism that any intelligence capable of building something that large and surviving that long could be reasoned with. They sent a small vessel carrying 3 of their most respected speakers bearing what their culture considered meaningful gifts, broadcasting greetings in 47 languages on rotating frequencies. The ship reached the edge of the Condemned's effective range. Then, like everything before it, it went dark. The Valhari did not send a second mission. They held a memorial ceremony for their 3 speakers and quietly removed the Condemned from their list of future diplomatic contacts. The SAR Collective, which was not one species but 6 networked together, sent automated probes rather than crew. The probes lasted longer than anything else had managed. They transmitted data back to the collective for almost 11 minutes. The data they sent was studied and debated for 100 years. It showed, among other things, that the interior of the ship was pressurized, that it contained a breathable atmosphere compatible with most known species, and that somewhere inside something was moving. The SAR never found out what was moving. Their probes went silent and were never seen again. The Kathari tried a second time 80 years after their first attempt. This time with 200 soldiers and significantly improved technology. The outcome was the same, all of them sitting, quiet, afraid. After that, the Galactic Council formally classified the condemned as a restricted zone, which was their way of saying the problem was larger than their current solutions, and they hoped it would eventually become someone else's concern. Captain Elena Voss was 34 years old, compact and sharp-featured. With short brown hair, she cut herself in a habit of standing with her arms crossed that her crew had quietly named the wall. She commanded the SS Resolute, a mid-class survey and salvage vessel out of the Kepler station network. The Resolute was not a warship. It had 2 light defensive cannons, an engine that Marcus said was fine, and that Voss privately considered held together by stubbornness and habit, and a crew of 11 people who had all, for various reasons they rarely discussed in detail, decided that working on the edge of explored space suited them better than whatever they had been doing before. She found out about the condemned on the 3rd day of a routine mapping job in the Tarsus Belt. When her first officer, Dak Reeves, sat down across from her in the common room and placed a data chip on the table without saying anything. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You're going to want to read it," he said. She picked it up and read it. It was a Galactic Council priority alert flagged at level 4, marked for senior commanders of member species only. The Kathari had made a 3rd attempt on the condemned. 1,200 soldiers, 3 full assault wings, and a specially engineered AI-piloted late craft designed to reach the hull before any defensive systems could respond. The AI had spent too many years working in bad light. He had lost 2 fingers on a salvage job years ago and never talked about it, he said. "What's the plan when we get there?" "Still working on it," Voss said. He nodded satisfied and put his hand down. Yaramos said, "Every species that tried went in the same way. Military force or technology. All of them trying to take the ship by overwhelming it." "Yes," Voss said. "Nobody tried anything else. The Velhari tried diplomacy," Dak said. "Still died, but they went with an agenda. Still trying to get something. Still trying to make the ship give them what they wanted." The room was quiet, with the kind of quiet that means thinking. "I keep coming back to that too," Voss said. Rinchin, the pilot, was at the back with her arms crossed and her expression completely unreadable, which was how her face looked most of the time. She said it moved after the last attack, pointed toward inhabited systems. She paused. "So, sounds like something that's tired of being bothered. Or testing a reaction," Dak said. "Testing what?" Brant Cole said. Brant was the security officer, the loudest person on board, and had a reliable talent for saying exactly what everyone else was thinking, but hadn't yet spoken. No one answered. Not because the question was bad, because the answers were still forming. "Course is 4 light days, 3 days at current speed," Voss said. "Anyone off?" Silence. Brant raised his hand. Voss looked at him. "I'm not getting off," he said. "I just want it formally noted that this is completely insane and I want that on the record." "Noted," Voss said. "Now let me have that crate. I need to sit down." The Resolute changed course. The engines pushed and the Tarsus Belt fell behind them. And ahead, 4 light days out, was the dim edge of the Rin cluster and something ancient and dark waiting inside it. Within 6 hours of changing course, they received 11 separate transmission warnings from 8 different species. Formal advisories, urgent requests, and what one crew member accurately described as outright begging. Every message said the same thing in different languages. "Turn back." Voss drafted one reply and sent it to all 11 simultaneously. It said, "Thank you for your concern. We are a registered survey vessel operating in uncontrolled space. We will maintain communication throughout our approach and do not anticipate requiring assistance." The responses to that were more alarmed than the original warnings. She stopped reading them. On the 2nd day, Dak came to her quarters late and stood in the doorway. 14 long-range probes tracking us now," he said. 6 different species watching. "Good," she said. "If something happens, at least someone will know where we were." He leaned against the doorframe. "Are you scared?" She looked at her cold coffee. "Yes," she said. "You." "Since I plotted the course," he said. "Same reason you ordered it. I think something's been out there 400 years and nobody knows what it wants. And it moved for the first time in 3 centuries. Moved. He paused. And it didn't move toward the Kadhari home system. Didn't move toward the council. Moved toward the inner systems, toward the youngest species in the galaxy. Voss looked at him. We're the newest ones here, she said quietly. The most recently arrived, and the first thing the condemned does after 300 years of sitting still is move. Right when humans start appearing in the outer sectors. Dak was quiet for a moment. Could be coincidence, he said. Could be, she said. Neither of them believed that. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ren's voice came over the internal comm controlled a fraction slower than usual. Captain, you should come up here. Voss came up. On the long-range display, close enough now to be a shape rather than a point, was the condemned. Even at this distance, through sensors and cameras, it looked wrong in a way that was difficult to explain. Not wrong like something broken. Wrong like something that existed at a slightly different angle from everything around it. As if the space it sat in followed slightly different rules than the rest of the cluster. Look at the probe data, Ren said with the same careful steadiness. Voss looked. The condemned had rotated again. The probes had tracked it and calculated the new heading and cross-referenced it with their navigation data. It was pointing directly at the Resolute. It had been pointing at them for 6 hours since approximately the time they had stopped reading the warning transmissions. Brant appeared in the bridge doorway holding a protein bar. He looked at the display. He chewed slowly. Then he said without much conviction, "Cool." He went back to finish eating. Voss stood at the display and looked at the dark shape ahead of them, massive and patient and watching. And she thought about 12 Dyson engineers and about 400 soldiers sitting quiet and afraid. And she thought about the Velhari with their gifts and their 47 languages. And she thought about Yarov saying, "Nobody tried anything else." "All right," she said to the ship on the screen to the empty bridge to herself. "Let's find out what you want." They crossed into the outer edge of the Rollins cluster on the morning of the 3rd day. And nobody had slept well the night before. That was not unusual before a difficult job. Voss had seen it 100 times. Alert crews got restless before hard work. They double-checked things that didn't need checking. Ate more than they needed to. Had conversations that started about ordinary things and ended in long silences. It meant the crew was paying attention. The ones who weren't restless before a dangerous job were the ones she worried about. But this was different from ordinary pre-mission tension, and everyone felt it. The equipment checks were longer. The silences were deeper. 3 separate crew members told Renshin separately that they were not scared, which meant all 3 of them were scared and couldn't say so directly without it feeling like failure. Ren told Voss this over coffee at 4 in the morning when the common room was empty and the Resolute ran on its night cycle lighting. Everything dimmer and quieter. "I know," Voss said. "They'll do their jobs," Ren said. "Fear's fine as long as it stays in the feet and out of the hands." "I know," Voss said again. Ren wrapped both hands around her mug and studied the star chart on the small panel above the galley window. The condemned was a labeled point on it now close enough to have its own marker, its own symbol. The symbol the navigation database used was a small red diamond, which meant hazard of unknown type, which was the database's polite way of saying we have no category for this. "Do you think it knew about us before it moved?" Ren asked. Voss had been turning that question over for 3 days. Maybe, she said, or maybe it moved for a completely different reason and we're seeing a pattern that isn't there. "The pattern's there." Ren said simply. "It pointed at us specifically out of everything in the sector." "That's not coincidence." "Then yes," Voss said. "It knew." "Then why us?" Ren asked. "There are hundreds of human ships operating in the outer sectors now. Why the Resolute?" Voss looked at her coffee. She didn't have an answer. She had been looking for one for 72 hours and she still didn't have one. The Resolute was not special. It was a middle-class survey ship with a good but not exceptional crew, an engine held together largely by Marcus' personal refusal to accept malfunction, and a record of solid but unspectacular work across 12 years of service. There was no logical reason for an ancient and apparently lethal ship of unknown origin to single them out from the dark. But it had hands in their laps. "Don't force it," she said. "Leave them exactly where they are." Brant looked at the display for a moment. Then he looked at Voss with an expression that contained both reluctance and trust, which was the combination she valued most in a security officer. He nodded. "Leaving them offline," he said. The internal communication screen on the bridge flickered. Then all 4 of the secondary displays showed the same thing at the same moment. A line of text in a language none of them recognized. White characters on black, scrolling slowly from right to left. The characters were not like anything in the navigation database's known languages index. They looked structured, like language, like something that meant specific things in sequence, but no trained eye on the ship could read them. The scroll lasted 8 seconds, and then every display returned to normal. Was that a message? Yarmos was standing in the bridge doorway, having come up from the medical bay. Her stylus was in her hand, and the end of it had clearly been chewed. I've sent it to the translation database, Dax said, recording everything. Could take a while. Could take a very long while if it matches any known language at all. Log it in and keep moving, boss said. Ren kept them on a slow, steady approach, not hesitant, not aggressive, deliberate, like a person walking towards something large and uncertain and choosing to do it with their chin up. Voss had picked the speed carefully because it looked like neither fear nor hostility, though she was aware the ship ahead of them could probably read whatever it wanted into their behavior regardless. At 300 meters from the hull, she said, "Stop here." Ren stopped them. The condemned filled most of the front viewport. At this range, the true scale of it was almost impossible to hold in the mind. Each of the overlapping metal plates on the hull was larger than the Resolute. The plates layered over each other in a pattern that repeated, but was never quite identical, like the scales of something biological that had grown rather than been built. The surface was not smooth. There were lines and grooves, markings of different depths, some that looked manufactured and deliberate, and some that looked like old damage, old scars from things that had happened a very long time ago. The metal had color in it that the cameras caught better than the human eye. Deep veins of blue-green running through the dark gray, iridescent and cold, visible only at certain angles, like the inside of certain shells. "It's beautiful," Yara said very quietly. Nobody disagreed with that. "No visible entry anywhere in the forward section," Dax said, scanning steadily. "No airlock, no docking collar, no hatch of any kind that we'd recognize as such. If there's a way in, it doesn't look like a door." "The Dreisen scorch mark," Voss said. 700 m back along the port side, Dax confirmed. "Still there. Can we reach it?" "Yes, then that's where we go." Ren moved them slowly along the hull. The Resolute traveled the length of a wall that went on and on. The markings scrolling past, the iridescent lines deep in the metal catching the light from the distant cluster stars. Nobody spoke on the bridge. There was no particular reason for silence, but silence felt appropriate and nobody broke it. The scorch mark was exactly where the record said it would be. About 1 meter across, rough at the edges, shaped so clearly like a reaching hand that Voss felt something move through her chest when she saw it. Not quite dread, something older than dread. "Right there," she said. Marcus was already running scans. "Hole reads the same as everywhere else," he said. "No opening, no structural weakness, no difference in composition." He paused. He ran the scan again. "But there's a heat differential. This section is about 3 degrees warmer than the surrounding hull." "Steady. The warmth is coming from inside the ship." "Like something living," Yara said. "Like something that generates its own heat," Marcus said carefully. The distinction between the two things was there in his voice, but he wasn't pushing it. Voss looked at the scorch mark for a long time. The Dreisen team had put their hand on the hull and died, but something had made that mark. Something had reached from inside the ship toward the surface or toward something outside it. The mark was shaped like a reaching hand. Not a burn pattern, not a mechanical impression, a hand reaching out. "I'm going outside," Voss said. Captain Dax said, "I'm not taking any equipment for forcing entry," she said. "I'm not going in. I'm going to walk up to the hull and put my hand on it. That's the only thing I'm going to do." That's also roughly what 12 Dreisen engineers did. Brandt said they had plasma cutters large enough to cut through the hull. Voss said they were there to force it open. "I'm not doing that." She looked at the scorch mark on the display. "I'm just going to say hello." Brandt looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who thinks the plan is dangerous but has decided to support it anyway because something about it makes sense to him, even if he can't fully say what. He said, "I'll get your suit." She went out alone. She had insisted on that part. If the ship was going to do something to the first person who touched it, she was not going to let it do it to 2 people at once when she could prevent that. She suited up in the airlock, ran all her checks twice, and stepped out through the outer door into the cold black of the cluster. The hull was right in front of her, huge and dark and close, and the faint iridescent veins in the metal caught the dim light of the distant stars. She activated her maneuvering thrusters and moved toward the scorch mark. She reached out. She pressed her palm flat against the hull. It was warm. Not the warmth of metal that has been sitting near a heat source. Warm from the inside, steady and constant. That specific quality of warmth that only comes from something generating its own heat from some internal process that does not stop. She had felt it before once, pressing her hand against the hull of a pressurized habitat after a power failure to check if the heating core was still running. That same quality, that same certainty of something alive, or at minimum, something continuously active on the other side. She held her hand there 30 seconds, a minute, nothing happened to her. No systems failed. Her suit held, her readings were normal, no sound, no signal, no attack. She moved her hand slightly and pressed it still again. The hull vibrated just once, gentle low, like a single deep breath taken by something very large and very slow. A pulse almost. Then 3 meters to her right, the hull opened. Not fast, not violently. Smoothly the way a hand opens when it is not making a fist. Several overlapping plates shifted and slid away from each other, folding back into the surrounding hull with a sound her helmet mic picked up as a sustained low tone. One steady note, resonant, nothing reading as weapon systems or charged emitters or anything I recognize actually. Scanners picking up a lot of energy readings, but nothing that categorizes into a known type. The ship is active. Dax said something's running in here. A lot of things. Voss stood in the center of the chamber and looked at the 4 corridors and felt with a certainty she could not explain and did not try to that the ship was doing the same thing she was. Looking back, deciding something, it let us in. And Yara said. Yes, Voss said. Every other species, it killed them outside. It never let them in at all. Yes, Voss said. Yara turned to look at her. In the dim blue-gray light, her dark eyes were very steady. So, what's different about us? Voss looked at the 4 corridors going into the dark heart of the ship. I don't know yet, she said, but I think we're about to find out. She picked the leftmost corridor and walked toward it. And after a brief pause, the kind of pause people make when they take a breath before something they can't take back. The others followed her. Behind them, the hull opening remained exactly as it was. It did not close. It was waiting for them to come back. The corridor was long and it did not stay straight. It curved slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first. Voss walked with her scanner up and her flashlight, adding hard white edges to the blue-gray glow of the wall lines. The corridor went left, then leveled, then went slightly down. The ceiling was higher than it needed to be, high enough for something larger than a human or for something that wanted open space above it. The walls were covered in the same overlapping plate design as the exterior. But here the plates were smaller, the pattern finer, and the markings were denser. Lines and shapes and characters that looked like the text that had appeared on the Resolute's displays, repeated in sections, different in others, running floor to ceiling in columns like a library built into the walls. Same script, Dax said, scanning the walls as he walked. Same characters as the transmission we received. It sent us its language, Yara said. Or part of it, Dax said. Or a greeting. Or its name. We don't know what we received. It sent us something, Yara said. Before we even got here, it sent us something while we were still on the Resolute. Voss kept walking. The floor beneath her boots was solid and seamless, the same dark metal, and it transmitted the low vibration that was still going. Deeper in the ship, something pulsed at that same steady rhythm. She had stopped calling it a sound in her head and started thinking of it as a heartbeat. Though she was careful not to say that out loud because she was the captain, and she needed the crew to follow facts, not her metaphors. The corridor opened into a smaller chamber, not vast like the first one. This was more like a large room 20 m across with a ceiling 10 m high and walls that curved inward at the top to meet in a single point. In the center of the room was a structure, not a machine, not exactly, more like a raised platform, roughly hexagonal, about a meter high. The top of it was flat, and on the flat surface, arranged with a precision that made them all slow down and look, were objects, 17 objects. Spread across the platform surface, some touching, some apart, each one different. Some were clearly technological, components, devices, pieces of equipment. Others looked geological, samples of rock or mineral. One appeared to be a container sealed with markings on it. One was small and dark and looked from a certain angle organic. Brant scanned them from the entrance to the room. Not explosive, not charged. No active energy outputs. They're just sitting there. Each one's from a different species, Dax said, moving closer. He was photographing everything. I recognize some of these. This material composition is consistent with Dressen manufacturing. This one is SAR Collective Tech. I've seen this type in reference databases. He straightened up slowly. These are from every expedition that came. The room was quiet. They tried to take things. Voss said the Kathari, the Dressen, they came here to claim the ship. The ship took something from them instead. It keeps records. Yara said she was standing at the edge of the platform looking at the objects without touching anything. These are its records, proof that they were here. The hand-shaped scorch mark on the hull, Voss said. It didn't come from the Dreisen team burning through the hull. It came from the other side. From in here, the ship reached out and left a mark. What? Brant said because something was there, Voss said. It leaves a record when something comes. She looked at the platform. 17 objects. At least 17 species, all dead. She looked at the empty space on the platform's surface. There was room for more. Nobody said what they were all thinking. Keep moving, Voss said. They went deeper. The corridors branched and connected. A system more like a living thing's internal structure than like the layout of a ship built for practical purposes. There was no obvious logic to where things were. No clear separation of engineering sections from crew sections from storage. Everything was continuous, connected, the wall markings unbroken, the light lines never stopping. The vibration got stronger the further in they went. Not threatening, just present, like the ship was breathing harder the deeper they went, or breathing with more intent. Yara stopped in a side passage and said in here the room she found was small, the smallest they had encountered. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in the script, more densely written than anywhere else. Column after column of it, and in the center of the room, suspended from the ceiling by thin cables of the same dark metal, was something that looked more than anything else like a map. It was a sphere roughly 2 m across. The surface of it moved, not quickly, not mechanically. It shifted slowly. Sections of it sliding over other sections in the way that tectonic plates move, except that the patterns on the surface were clearly positional data. Stars, systems, regions of space. Voss recognized the Orion cluster. She recognized the inner systems, the core worlds, the mapped zone. She recognized features of the galaxy she had been navigating for 12 years. And she recognized that the map showed things that were not on any human chart. Regions beyond the outer boundary of explored space, systems that no surveying mission had ever reached. A vast section of the galaxy that was marked differently from the rest. Covered in a dense pattern of the ship's script, detailed and thorough, as if the ship had been there, had studied it all, had recorded everything. This ship has been further than we have, Dak said very quietly. He was pointing at a section of the map that was so far from known space that it had no reference points at all, just the ship's own markings and notation. A lot further, Voss said. The sphere continued to shift, its patterns rearranging slowly in an endless geological meditation. It wasn't displaying for them specifically. It was doing what it always did. They were the constant low pulse that had been running through the ship since they entered. That rhythm that Voss had stopped calling a sound and started thinking of as a heartbeat simply ceased. The silence it left was so complete that all 4 of them stopped walking at the same moment. Nobody gave an order. They just all stopped and stood in the sudden quiet and felt it. 12 seconds of absolute silence. Then the vibration returned, but not the same rhythm. Slower now, longer between pulses, as if whatever generated it had made one adjustment and settled into a different pattern. As if it had been watching them notice the silence and had decided something based on how they stood in it. Voss looked at Dak. Dak looked at Voss. He said very quietly. It's calibrating. Calibrating to what Brandt said to us. Voss said the 4th event was the one that removed all doubt. They had found a large secondary chamber roughly 3 kilometers into the ship. It was different from the entrance chamber. This one had structures in it. Not furniture. Nothing recognizable as furniture, but forms that rose from the floor in arrangements that suggested use without revealing what use. Columns, surfaces, recesses in the walls at varying heights. The light lines were brighter in here. The script on the walls was different. Not the scrolling columns from the corridors, but something more like images, shapes that were almost but not quite representational, like abstract pictures of things rather than pictures of the things themselves. In the center of this chamber, the floor had a different texture, smothered, darker, and it was warm. Warmer than the surrounding floor, warmer than the walls. The specific warmth that Voss had felt on the outside hull coming from inside. That warmth was here, generated from directly underfoot. She stood on the warm section of floor and looked up at the ceiling. Above her, set into the highest point of the chamber ceiling, was something she had not seen anywhere else in the ship. It was a circle roughly 3 m across of a different material than the surrounding metal. Not dark, not blue-gray, pale, almost white, luminescent on its own without any light lines feeding it. It glowed with a steady, even light that was warmer in color than the rest of the ship. Something closer to the yellow-white of a star than the cool blue of the wall lines. And it was looking at her, not metaphorically. Not in the way people said. The Mona Lisa looked at you wherever you stood. The circle was oriented toward her. When she took 3 steps to the left, the orientation shifted. Not the whole circle, but a subtle change in the quality of the light and where the intensity was focused to track her movement. When she stopped, it stopped. When Dak walked across the warm floor section, it moved to follow him. When Yara sat down on the floor, it settled its attention on Yara and stayed there. Brandt stood off to the side on the regular floor and watched all of this. He said, "It's looking at us." "Yes," Voss said. The ship is watching us, he said, making sure the idea was fully stated, fully out in the open where everyone could look at it directly. Yes, Voss said. It has been this whole time, Yara said. She was still sitting on the floor. She had pulled her knees up and was looking at the glowing circle above her without any fear in her face. Something else was there instead. The expressions of someone who has just understood something that they had been circling for a while. The floor gap, the lights going out, the rhythm changing. It wasn't testing whether we could handle obstacles. She paused. It was watching how we handled obstacles, how we thought, how we talked to each other, what we prioritized. It was watching to see what we are, Dax said. Voss looked at the circle above her. It moved very slightly, tracking her. Then let it watch, she said. She reached into her kit and pulled out the small handheld camera she always carried on survey jobs. A habit from 10 years of documentation work. Nothing special about it. She held it up and pointed it at the glowing circle. She took a picture of it. The circle pulsed once, a single bright flash, quick and clean like a shutter closing. The same light, the same warmth, but deliberate, intentional. It took a picture back. Brant made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. Did it take our picture? Yes, Yara said, and she was smiling. The first real smile any of them had smiled since boarding the ship. I think it did. The chamber was quiet except for the low returning pulse of the ship's rhythm. Steady and slow. The glowing circle above them held its warmth. And somewhere deep in the ship, further in than they had yet gone, past more corridors and chambers and things they hadn't seen. Something that had been waiting for a very long time was doing something that if it had a face might have looked like relief. They stayed in the chamber for another hour. They didn't rush. They walked the edges of the room and looked at the structures and photographed everything. And Dax spoke into his recorder and Yara wrote notes on her scanner screen. And Brant sat down on the warm floor section with his back against one of the column structures and ate a protein bar from his suit pocket with total composure as if sitting inside an ancient and possibly conscious alien ship eating a snack was a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing. The glowing circle above him watched him eat with what Voss for the rest of her life would describe as curiosity. They made their way back to the entrance, past the map room and the record platform and the dark metal corridors, and they went back out through the opening in the hull that was still exactly as they had left it, still breathing its slow tone, still waiting for them. Voss was last. She turned in the opening and looked back at the blue-gray dark inside. "We'll be back," she said. She did not say it to her crew. She said it to the ship. The tone from the opening changed pitch just slightly, just for a moment, then settled back. Voss had been on enough survey jobs to know when a communication was minimal and still complete. She went back to the Resolute and started planning for tomorrow. That night, 14 alien species long-range probes tracked the Resolute sitting stationary against the hull of the Condemned and tried to make sense of the sensor data they were recording. Representatives from 6 galactic governments received reports from their monitoring teams. 3 emergency council sessions were convened in the space of 4 hours. A great deal was said in many languages by many senior officials about what the humans were doing and what it might mean and what should be done about it. None of them had any answers. None of them had good ideas. All of them were in their various ways afraid. On the Resolute, Marcus Webb was in his engine room running diagnostics on a system that was still running at 12% above standard efficiency with no explanation and humming to himself and thinking. On the bridge, Rinchin was monitoring the probe signals, tracking them, and writing a very calm and thorough report about what she was seeing and what she thought it meant. In the common room, Voss was at the table with a mug of tea and all of Dax's recordings from inside the ship and the translation database running its comparison work. 3 hours into a process that the system estimated might take 3 days, she was not waiting on the database. She was thinking about the glow, the warmth, the picture it had taken of them. The way the rhythm of the ship had changed after they sat in that silence together, calibrating, Dax had said. She turned the word over in her mind. Something that had been waiting for 400 years, that had turned steps rather than arriving all at once. Marcus walked with his scanner in one hand and his other hand trailing along the wall, not quite touching the marked surface. He did this for about 10 minutes before Voss asked him what he was doing. Feeling for vibration changes, he said. There are subsystems running in these walls. Energy conduction, I think, though not in any configuration I've seen before. Something is moving through the walls. Not electricity, not heat transfer, not anything I can categorize cleanly. He lifted his hand and looked at it. But the distribution pattern is consistent, regular, like it has a purpose, and it's doing it very reliably. What kind of purpose? Yara asked. She come again, and she had spent the first 15 minutes of their walk photographing the wall script at every different angle her suit could manage. Maintenance, Marcus said, or communication, or both at the same time. The two might not be separate functions here. He dropped his hand and kept walking. This ship maintains itself, he said. The atmosphere, the gravity, the temperature, the lights that come on. Something in these walls is doing all of that continuously without stopping for however long the ship has been operating. 400 years at minimum, Nadia said from behind them. She said it simply as a fact and said nothing else, which was consistent with how she communicated generally. Exactly the required number of words and then silence. A lot longer than that, Marcus said. The probe data suggested the internal systems showed age consistent with several thousand years of continuous operation. At minimum, he paused. This thing is old. They walked in silence for a moment, carrying that idea. The corridor ended in a room that was not like anything they had found the day before. It was large. Not as large as the main entrance chamber, but large enough that when they walked into it, the first thing everyone felt was the ceiling being higher than it needed to be. The room was circular, and the floor, unlike the corridor, was not a flat, continuous surface. It had levels. Concentric rings stepped down from the outer edge toward the center, like an amphitheater. Each level about half a meter lower than the one outside it, with the lowest point, the center, roughly 3 m below the entrance level. At the center filling the lowest ring was a pool, not water, not any liquid any of them could identify on sight. It was dark as the hull metal, which shouldn't have been possible for a liquid, and perfectly still, and it gave off a faint light from somewhere below its surface. Deep blue, regular as the pulse of the ship. The pool was roughly 5 m across. Around its edge, the floor had markings, not the script from the walls, something different. Symbols arranged in a ring, evenly spaced, each one unique. Yara counted them, moving her light slowly around the ring. 17, she said. Nobody moved for a moment. 17 species, Voss said. Same number as the objects on the collection platform. Their symbols, Nadia said. Voss moved to the first step and started down toward the center. The warmth increased as she descended. At the bottom, standing at the edge of the pool, the low vibration of the ship was strong enough to feel in her chest, in her teeth. Not painful, not overwhelming, just deeply present, like standing too close to a large speaker. She looked at the 17 symbols. She looked at the pool. On the ring of symbols there was a gap. Between two of the symbols, the gap was roughly the same width as the others, as if it was a space waiting to be filled. An 18th symbol that hadn't been placed yet. Marcus came down and stood beside her. He scanned the pool surface carefully. He ran the scan twice and read the results and said, "It's not a liquid." "What is it?" Voss said, "Don't know." Marcus said, "It's registering as matter, but the type doesn't match any material in my database. It's not organic, not mineral, not metallic. It's registering as something the scanner can't categorize." He looked up. "But it's connected to the walls. The same energy I've been feeling in the walls. It's concentrated here. All of it is feeding into this. It's the source," Voss said. "Or a node," Marcus said. "A junction, something." Nadia was walking the ring, photographing each symbol. She stopped at the gap. She stood there for a long time, not speaking, looking at the empty space between the two flanking symbols. Then she crouched down and with her gloved finger drew a slow, simple line in the thin layer of dark particulate that had settled on the floor at the pool's edge. Just a line testing the surface. Looking at how it responded, the pool surface moved. Not much. A single ripple starting from the center and moving outward, reaching the edge of the pool and then reversing, folding back inward. And when it reached center again, it disappeared into the stillness. One ripple in response to one mark drawn near the edge by one human finger. Nadia sat back on her heels and looked at the pool. In her quiet way she said, "It knows we're at the edge of it." "Yes," Voss said. "It's been waiting for us to come to this room," Nadia said. Everything else was a corridor. "What is this room?" Leon Hargrove said. He had been standing at the second ring, one level up, saying nothing, watching everything. He was the kind of person who needed to see a complete picture before he said anything about it. And he had been building his picture since they walked in. Voss looked at the pool, at the 17 symbols, at the gap between them. She thought about all of it. The record platform, the map sphere, the glowing circle that took their picture, the rhythm that changed, every observation they had made, every choice the ship had made in their presence. "I think it's where it talks," Voss said. "When it decides to talk, it hasn't decided yet." Leon said, "I don't think so." Voss said, "I think we're still." She stopped. She was going to say, "still being evaluated," and she stopped because the word evaluation felt wrong for what was happening. Evaluation implied an authority passing judgment on a lesser party. That wasn't what this felt like. "It's still deciding if it wants to," Nadia said, filling in the pause. "Not whether we're good enough, whether it wants to." The pool was still. Voss thought about that for a long moment, about a ship that had been here for 400 years, which had been out in the unmapped dark for thousands of years before that, which had watched species come in and bring their weapons and their tools and their agendas and die. All of them, every time without exception. She thought about what it might feel like to wait that long. She sat down on the lowest ring facing the pool and stayed there. Marcus, meanwhile, had gone back up 2 levels and found something in the wall that he could not stop looking at. A panel recessed slightly. The same plate metal design as everything else, but with a small rectangular section that was different. The markings on it arranged differently, more regular in a pattern that Marcus' 47 years of looking at mechanical systems recognized without being able to say exactly why. He looked at it for a while. He got out his small multi-tool. He looked at it some more. He put the multi-tool away. He looked at the panel again with just his